I'd like to talk about the role of women in the philosophy and the art of Franz Schubert. There are two ways of looking at reality. Our understanding of reality can be monolithic in terms of facts, a logical concatenation of facts. You're trying to find that logic. You're trying to get to principles that then can be logically applied to the concrete case. And in this kind of reality, this understanding of reality, the man and woman, the tension between man and woman is basically irrelevant. But there's another way of understanding reality, and that is in terms of tensions between opposites. And in the tension between opposites, the relationship between man and woman becomes a symbol of the whole thing. It becomes a symbol of what's happening actually in all of life. And problem solving becomes something far more than the application of a principle. In fact, it becomes the negation of such applications because it takes opposites into consideration and sees problem solving in terms of a synthesis of opposites. And this was the importance of Immanuel Kant's philosophy and why it kicked off such an amazing response in German and Austrian thinking. Now, Franz Schubert was a neo-Kantian, and so he basically saw reality in terms of this tension between opposites. And he saw the tension between man and woman as a unique expression of the tension between God and his people. And that tension was expressed in a unique way by the Song of Songs, and further by the wisdom literature of the Old Testament, and then again by John in his book of Revelation. The Mariology of Christianity is an expression of this unique role of woman. What is that role? She is indeed the bride of God. She is, in all her psychology, meant to attract, to yearn for, to be faithful to this divine source of her life. That divine source is God, and she is, by her attraction, the one that receives that love, the one who is enriched by that love, the one who brings forth by that love a divine Son. She is the bride of God in her unique situation in life. Every woman in her unique way, with her unique experiences, with everything that's happened in her life that brought her to this now point, is the bride of God and called to be that bride. Now, this is basic to the Schubert vision, and Schubert gives expression to this romance between opposites. He gives expression to the synthesis necessary between the opposites of immanence and transcendence, of mankind and God. of woman and man. These opposites superimposed upon one another bring forth what all creation is meant to be. So when Schubert composes his pieces, often enough, he has as background a relationship between a man and a woman. That relationship begins by a transfiguration of their lives by coming together. It empowers both of them. But then there is a splitting apart, a separation, a painful, deeply painful separation. But that is not the end, nor is death the end, because beyond this life, there is the ultimate synthesis. There is the ultimate coming together of opposites. There is the ultimate perfection of the bride of God as the perfect divine Sophia, divine wisdom. Today I'd like to speak about the Fantasy Sonata. That's Deutsch 894, and it deals with two worlds. The fact is that we have a foot in one world, another foot in a second world. And this particular sonata focuses upon this, and it focuses upon the delicacy of balance between the two. So let's turn now to this fantasy sonata. It was composed in 1826, and in 1826, at that very same time, he was setting poetry as leader. And the poetry as leader were composed just a little bit before this piano sonata was composed. And you'll be able to experience the fine fit that is there between the inspiring poem and the inspired movement of the sonata work. I think that what Schubert is doing is trying to focus upon the counterbalance of opposites that of which our life consists. That counterbalance is so important because if we go off in one direction only, then there's going to be catastrophe. One of the directions has to do with transcendence. That is, we have an orientation, an experiential orientation to actual transcendence. We feel invited, we feel called, we feel corrected. There is this ongoing conscience-like orientation to transcendence. We feel that we should be something that we not yet are. We feel that we are doing something that should be done, or perhaps are not doing something that should have been done. The other orientation is towards immanence. There is the world in which we live, the world in which we have our consciousness, and this consciousness is all the time there. We are aware that we are where we don't quite want to be, that in this immanent world, we are becoming something that we are not yet. And so there is a tension between two worlds, one of invitation and the other of where we actually are. So let's turn to this piano sonata because it's a amazing kind of experience. It's a mystical experience. And this mystical experience begins with a poem by Franz Schober. The poem is called Noctella. You could say Transfigured Night. And it was composed as a lead in January of 1826, just before, a little before, the piano sonata was composed. The moon smiles upon our night world. It transforms our dusky night world into a paradise of love. And so the moon represents or symbolizes a kind of medium that brings to us this higher world. Vanquished by sleep's power, worry, guilt, and pain are gone. Spiritual freedom rules the world in gentle beauty. Look there, the fields are new, the old earth has disappeared. I see a garden of silver with perfumed scents, bathed in golden mist and magical light. Man's spirit breaks free of its slavery. In a cloud of sweet yearning, it tastes the life of heaven. Tastes this transcendental reality. But the piercing call of the nightingale reminds our dream-filled hearts of harsh reality. Into the midst of that heaven, her call awakens the deepest pain, the need for love. And so, with the first movement, we're introduced to this basic tension in consciousness between what is and what should be. In the second movement, we have a poem by Johanna Schopenhauer. And Johanna's poem has to do with the beloved, has to do with that medium, that middle point between us and the unseen source of our divine invitation. Leave me alone, though I am in agony. Leave me alone. Quietly go away. I dream of her at night. See her in the dawn. She is ever with me. How can you think that I could find peace with you? She has stolen my peace. Where she is, there I must be, in this life or beyond it. Don't deny this consideration to my heart. It is only one problem, it lives only to die. It has never concealed that. So leave me alone, I can only think of her, can only dream as she does. Apart from her, there is no heaven for me. In life and in death, in the better world as in this one, in times of joy and in the pain of separation, I am hers alone. So then the third movement. The third movement is a setting of a poem set by Schubert as a lead. Hark, hark, the lark, Shakespeare. The poem goes like this, and here is a vision of triumph, a sense that transcendence has been gained, that the barrier has been crossed, that we are where we ought to be. Hark, hark, the lark at heaven's gate sings, and Phoebus' gins arise, his steeds to water at those springs on chaliced flowers that lies, and winking merry buds begin to open their golden eyes with everything that pretty is, my lady sweet. Arise, arise, arise. The arising, the coming forth of immanence into transcendence, the transfiguration in a triumph of love. And finally, in the fourth movement, we have a poem, also Noctella, Transfigured Night, but this time by Johann Gabriel Seidel. And the poem goes like this. The night is clear and pure, of brightest glory. So here is a man whose consciousness is suffused by transcendence. The houses are wondrous in their silvery veils. The brightness is mysteriously within me, so full, so overflowing, it pulses inwardly, free, limpid, with no anguish, no cares. I cannot keep within me this wealth of light. It will come out. It must come out, bursting the last chains. The night is clear and pure, of brightest glory. And so in Seidel's poem, we have this mystical experience, a kind of foretaste of what lies on the other side, of what invites us, of what transfigures our lives right now, here and now, but also calls us to a fuller, more magnificent transfiguration beyond the grave. Our world today is torn between a fundamentalism in which transcendence is seen as something that we had and lost, and on the other hand is seen as nothing. Really, transcendence doesn't exist, and so we have no deeper meaning to life at all than simply what concretely, materially exists. Back 250 years ago, there was quite a discussion over this kind of thing, and Kant insisted upon the existence of the transcendence, and he called it the noumenon. But he said that there's no way to understand it, that it's beyond our understanding. Hegel said it's not beyond our understanding. I can understand it. And he thought it, he really had it in his vision of history. Karl Marx said, well, not only is it understandable, but you can really grab hold of it because it's nothing but matter. What we are seeking is material, and what we can get is material if we only use our good sense to achieve it. Nietzsche was disgusted with the stupidity of this whole matter. And he said, you're reducing man to a midget. Man is becoming a midget because he's lost transcendence. God is dead. And there's no way obvious to regain that reality. Where is transcendence? No one knows. Franz Schubert was different. Franz Schubert saw the problem. He experienced the problem very profoundly. He experienced the agony involved in the problem deeply and expressed it in his art in song cycles like Winterreise or the Schöne Müllerin. But again and again, he expressed that depth of agony in his instrumental works. But he didn't leave it there. There was more to it. In fact, there's something that precedes that agony and triumphs over it, and that is divine invitation. This invitation of transcendence calls us where we are to where we ought to be. And this difference, this addition, in fact, it's not an addition. It's the presupposition that underlies the entire life experience for Schubert. But what is most extraordinary about Schubert is the depth to which he dives in finding that deep reality, that transcendental invitation. There's nothing cheap about it. There is nothing like fundamentalism, simply going back 220 or 300 or 3,000 years and finding it and making an active belief in it. Transcendence calls. It calls in the now. It calls us and transfigures the now of each one of us. Each of us is unique. Each of us has our own problems, our own agonies, and called through those problems and through those agonies, as well as through the joys, called to something mysterious, something beyond our knowledge. It calls us to the transcendental perfection that we sense, whose invitation we experience in life, but which remains beyond our understanding, beyond our full grasp forever in this life, but not forever beyond it. The issue challenging all of us is, what do you do with opposites? What do you do with opposing races, with opposing sexes, with opposing nations? Do you go to war? Or in some kind of way do you try to create something positive out of the opposition? Do you try to eliminate the opposition and make a homogeneous reality? Or do you work with the opposites and create something new? The effort to deal with opposites has a long, long history. One essential part of it was theology, the question of religion. Do you select between opposites? Judaism sees itself as the chosen people. Does that mean that they're chosen and the others are not? That there are consequences to that with respect to treatment, respect to an ethic? Does it mean that Catholics are the replacement of the Jews as chosen people and everyone else is not? Or does it mean some kind of synthesis? This challenge of opposites affected the philosophy of Kant, and Kant dealt with the opposites in terms of thesis and antithesis. The thesis is challenged by the antithesis. And what happens? For Kant, it was a synthesis of the two. Later on, it was for Hegel, not a synthesis, but a sort of supreme vision of truth, which replaced the opposites. For Marx, it was a selection between the opposites that was the answer to this challenge. And then for Nietzsche, it was a question of failure, the failure of all of these previous attempts to deal with opposites that was rendering a society of midgets, a society of tiny people who were less than men. And what do you do about that? What is to be done? In physics, the challenge of opposites is there in quantum physics, between the wave and the particle. In science, there is no problem of opposites. You simply logic. But in quantum physics, there's definitely a question of opposites. And gravity is in opposition to quantum physics. The wave is in contradiction to the particle. The study of the particle, the study of its behaviors over time and space gives rise to the need for another dimension of reality, this dimension that we're calling gravity, in which there is this dynamic that is in focus rather than the things themselves. So opposites underlie the efforts of mankind to understand what reality is all about and then do something about it. The effect of dealing with opposites inadequately can be seen in the wars of today, that nation cannot get along with nation, and we have unending war. We have unending war between sexes, unending war between races. So the question really is selection between opposites the answer? And if it isn't the answer, then what is? In physics, the question of what to do with the opposites has been terribly productive because there has been an advance in terms of synthesis between the opposites, somehow or other working towards interaction, positive, productive tensions between the opposites. And so we have its effect, for example, in technology. In religion, there has been inadequate advance in terms of what to do with opposites, in terms of synthesis between them. War is still pretty much the name of the game, although there is more and more evidence of an ecumenism and an effort to synthesize for one group to recognize its fulfillment in another rather than a challenge, simply a challenge to its existence. In art, we have had a breakthrough, and that breakthrough came as a post-Kantian artist, a post-Kantian composer of music, brought together the opposites of sorrow and love, of death and resurrection, new life, of life and transcendence, eternal life. This was Franz Schubert. And this vision of Schubert's is based upon the vision of John in his gospel with his gnosis. Two worlds, one being transfigured by another. The world of God, the world of transcendence, and the world of immanence, the world of the wanderer, and the wanderer being invited upwards, invited even through death to that higher world of transcendental transfiguration of all that he is and wants to be. So therefore, this is basic to our understanding of life. What to do with opposites? Is it to be the selection that leads to eternal war? Or is it to be synthesis that leads to transfiguration? Our self-understanding is in question, and it always has been. Today, and for quite a number of years, 3,000 years, we have had a left brain focus upon things and their relationships, and not much of a focus upon the right brain orientation to dynamics, the right brain orientation to the call of transcendence. And yet that call to transcendence is basic to our self-understanding, to a healthy self-understanding. And we've got to know more about it. But this orientation to right brain kind of thinking has had a rough history in our Western civilization. We have tended to focus upon science and the left brain mastery of reality by control of efficient causality. And our knowledge of that has been good. It's not that that's a bad focus, but it is a focus that must be counterbalanced by an equal or even more important focus upon transcendence and the orientation of our world towards that transcendence, its experience of transcendental invitation, its response to transcendental invitation. Then the left brain must figure out how that response can be made. In philosophy, it was Immanuel Kant who talked about this and talked about the impossibility of really knowing much about this right brain orientation. He didn't talk about right brain, but he had talked about the noumenon, which can be seen as something that the left brain really has no knowledge of. The left brain is focused upon relationships between things in immanence. But we're talking about the orientation of things in immanence to something other than itself. We're talking about the relationship of one world to a higher world. In religion, this orientation has caused a lot of problems because that orientation to the higher world has been seen as a matter of revelation of the higher world to the lower world. And there's been institutional religion, which is mediated that orientation to the higher world. And it has seen this experience of transcendence that is really the province of the individual. It has seen this as a challenge, and an unwanted challenge, often enough. And so therefore, we're talking about the need for a reform of institutional religion, a reform of Judaism, a reform of Catholicism, a reform of Protestantism, one that renounces the stupidities of fundamentalism and puts in their place this orientation that the individual has, that is experienced in the now, experienced in the situation, experienced uniquely by the individual, so that the primary task of the institution is not to bring the invitation of God to the individual, but rather to make that individual aware, awakened to that ongoing invitation that is expressed also through revelation in its own limited fashion. So therefore, what we see in quantum physics today is something that must be emulated by institutional religion. Quantum physics is not content with left brain ideology, but is going beyond it, because left brain ideology leaves unanswered questions, and there must be projected a different kind of orientation to reality, a kind of bipolar relationship between immanence and transcendence. And that bipolarity is not just something in physics, it is something also in the higher consciousness that is expressed in religion. The impact of what we're saying about opposites upon religion has got to be explored far more deeply than we have done in the past. It's not that we are suggesting in any way, shape, or form that there is no relevance of religion, of institutional religion, to the life of the individual. Institutional religion has an immensely important role to play, just as the left brain has an immensely important role to play in the life of every individual. But the right brain must be taken into consideration. And so therefore, questions of morality are not to be determined simply by kind of an a priori decision based upon the implications of an idea. The implications of an idea are in a world that doesn't exist. But in the world that does exist, there are all kinds of ideas, differing ideas, conflicting ideologies, conflicting moral principles, conflicting moral solutions to problems. And so how does the individual go about solving them? Well, certainly an institution that does its very best to discover what the implications of some of the ideas to which it subscribes, some of those ideas suggest. This institution is very valuable. But on the other hand, this institution is limited. and it's limited in its ability to dictate to the individual just what the invitation of the now, the moment is, because the moment is unique, just as the individual is unique. And the morality is something that emanates from that moment and the individual is to be awakened to it, because what is actually happening is that the transcendental invitation, the invitation of being itself, has an impact upon the in-beingness of the individual in that now. And that now, that impact is going to be tailored by just exactly what that now entails. What it consists of will determine the morality of the individual. So therefore, what we're saying has a great deal to do with religion. It means that religion must be reformed and that the fundamentalism of simply taking ideas and drawing out their logical implications is a very inadequate approach to morality. That morality is a far more rich thing than that. Yes, it includes ideologies and it includes the implications of ideas, ideals, but it also includes much more than that. And it's going to be in responding to that full invitation that the individual actually makes his ascent towards transcendence.